Welcome to Mental Models Daily, where we explore one mental model each day to help you elevate your daily decision-making. Today, we're exploring a fallacy that often leads us to misunderstand the nature of randomness, the Monte Carlo Fallacy. I assure you, no roulette wheels were spun in the making of this podcast. The Monte Carlo Fallacy, also known as the gambler's fallacy, is the mistaken belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during a given period, it will happen less frequently in the future, or vice versa. It's rather like expecting a coin to land on tails, because it's landed on heads several times in a row. Alas, coins have neither memory nor a sense of fairness. This fallacy gets its name from an infamous incident at the Monte Carlo Casino in 1913, where the roulette ball fell on black 26 times in a row. Gamblers lost millions betting against black, believing that red was due to come up. They forgot that each spin of the wheel is independent and has no obligation to balance out previous results. Let's consider a common example. Imagine you're playing a lottery and you notice that the number 7 hasn't come up for weeks. The Monte Carlo fallacy might lead you to believe that 7 is now more likely to appear. In reality, each draw is independent, and 7 remains just as likely or unlikely as ever. Unless, of course, the lottery balls have developed a sense of turn-taking. In finance, the Monte Carlo fallacy can lead to poor investment decisions. An investor might see a stock's price fall for several days and assume it must rise soon to balance out. This is akin to expecting a rainy spell to be inevitably followed by sunshine. While it might happen, the weather, like the stock market, doesn't operate on a balance sheet. The Monte Carlo fallacy often appears in sports. A football fan might believe their team is due for a win after a string of losses. While this optimism is admirable, it's about as logical as expecting a die to roll a 6 because it hasn't done so in a while. The die, much like the football gods, remains stubbornly indifferent to past results. In everyday life, this fallacy can influence our perception of chance events. After a run of bad luck, one might think, "My luck has to turn soon." This is rather like expecting the universe to have a karma meter that must always balance to 0. So how can we avoid falling for the Monte Carlo fallacy? Firstly, remind yourself that for independent events, each occurrence is unaffected by what came before. A coin doesn't land on heads because it owes you one after a run of tails. It's like expecting a new hotel guest to behave like the previous occupant of the room. Secondly, understand that in truly random processes, streaks and clusters are not just possible, but expected. A perfectly shuffled deck of cards might well have all 4 aces clustered together. It's not a sign of faulty shuffling, just as a run of rainy days isn't a sign of a broken weather system. Lastly, when tempted to bet on a due outcome, pause and consider the actual probabilities involved. The likelihood of a fair coin landing on heads remains 50%, regardless of whether it's just landed on tails 10 times in a row or alternated perfectly for the last 100 flips. In conclusion, recognizing the Monte Carlo fallacy can help us better understand randomness and make more rational decisions in the face of uncertainty. It reminds us that Lady Luck doesn't keep a ledger, and the law of averages is more of a long-term description than a short-term guarantee. Thank you for joining me today on Mental Models Daily. I hope this exploration of the Monte Carlo fallacy hasn't gambled away your attention. Until next time, may your decisions be based on sound probability rather than misguided expectations of cosmic balance. For more mental models, please visit mentalmodelsdaily.com or find us on X or Instagram. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com.